If we understand what best describes what they want, we could create pricing around that too. If you want us to be a pair of hands, that's this relationship. If you want us to be an expert, it's this relationship. If you want us to be a collaborative partner with you, that's this type of relationship. And have them decide what is best for them.
You're listening to the Spotlight edition of The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Louie Prosperi. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. I'm Louie Prosperi. Today's Spotlight episode is going to be a good one. It's part 2 of our 3-part series on subscription models for bookkeeping and accounting businesses. I'm joined with a longtime friend who is the Senior Director of Sage Accountant Solutions, and he's the co-host of the Soul of Enterprise show with Ron Baker. Ed Kless, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be with you, Louie.
Ed, you and I connected during my stay as the CEO of the organization now called CPB Canada. And it was a pleasure of recently reconnecting with you at Scaling New Heights event in Orlando. And I really enjoyed us reconnecting. The COVID with the lack of travel kind of had an impact on us, but it was great seeing you again.
Yeah, great seeing you too. It's great to be seen and not just viewed. It was just weird to be three-dimensional.
Yeah, honestly, I know the Zoom thing is great. Don't get me wrong, but and even these podcasts are fantastic. But the face-to-face reconnection, I think, is still important in our world today.
Agreed.
Recently, at Scaling New Heights, a new business model for the professional bookkeeping and accounting industry was introduced, and it is based on the new book that is coming up by Ron Baker, a dear friend of both of ours, called Time's Up, the subscription model for accounting firms. I'd like to get your view of this new model and what you think.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that. And just to further plug Ron's book, for those of you listening to this, if you want, we are doing something special for the launch of that book in November. And if you go to thesoulofenterprise.com/times up, you can join our pre-release club. Some special benefits for that. You just need to sign up there and send the receipt when you pre-order Ron's book. But back to your question, Louie. Yeah, the subscription business model is now emerging for professional firms. It's not a new model. I mean, it actually goes back to the 1400s and map makers were the original folks who had this subscription model when they were updating all of the maps on a fairly consistent basis, and they used subscription to do it. But it is getting I'll call it a resurgence or a reintroduction, a renaissance, if you will, into the professional service firm world. And Ron and I are real excited about it because we think above all what it does is it really puts the relationship at the center and the transformation of the person. And while Ron and I both really think that value pricing is great, it paid a little bit of lip service to the value value piece, whereas I think that subscription does a much better job at it. And I really like the fact that it's still based on so many of the same concepts that we used in value pricing, but has really rethought some of the back end, the measurements that we need to do, and that kind of thing.
Well, that's great that you actually mentioned that it's based on a lot of the same concepts, because a lot of us value-based business model guys like myself, and now that the professional world in accounting and bookkeeping is it's not entrenched in our system, but it's beyond the early adopters. It's gone to the next phase, which is great. And now we're coming up with a subscription model. What things that are similar or things that we can just easily bring into the subscription-based model that doesn't have to change or that we don't have to relearn?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of really core concepts that are still important, and one of which is that value is still subjective. That hasn't changed, and that prices are contextual. I mean, there's some significant differences, and I'm sure Ron talked about them with regard to the actual pricing of the subscription model. It's not simply taking an annual price and dividing it by 12. That's not what we're talking about at all. But I will say that things like offering choices to a customer, offering 3 different levels of your subscription, I think is still important. Now, it remains to be seen. That might change over time. But I think right now, that's still something that's important, as well as just the whole concept of the value conversation, having a conversation and understanding of value. And probably even more importantly, and this is what I talked about at Scaling New Heights, the concept of moving off the solution, because I think we're still going to have prospective customers coming to us with a particular problem in mind. And I think the mistake that far too many professionals make is to go about answering that question and alleviating that concern too early in the process.
We'll get back to the interview right after this word from our sponsor.
Hey folks, Ed here. Ron is far too modest to tell you about his new book with Paul Dunn, so I'm just going to have to go ahead and do it. Scheduled to release on December 8th, Time's Up, the subscription business model for professional firms, is going to rock the world like the firm of the future did 2 decades ago. While you can't get the book until December, you can join the pre-order club by buying the book and sending us your receipt. Benefits start in August and will continue through February. For more details, visit thesouloфenterprise.com/timesup.
Thank you for hearing from our sponsor. Now let's get back to the interview.
What do you mean by too early in the process? Is that like giving away is it giving away the farm before? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Like
so this is the story that I tell, because this happened to me, and it was way back in 1996, 95, 96, something around then. I was at a part of an organization that was a reseller and implementer of accounting software for mid-market organizations, medium-sized businesses. And there was back then, Louie, I don't know if you remember, but the demo was like an all-day affair. Right. What we do is we would show up at the demo, and it was really prospect training is really what it was. And we would keep showing features until the person said, okay, yep, I need that. Or please shut up. Please shut up, and I will buy from you. If you would just stop talking, please. We would take them through, how to cut an accounts payable check and all of this stuff. And I distinctly remember this one time. This guy, Evan, he was the chief operating officer of this company. He stood up in the middle of the demo and said, Ed, stop. He said, it's real important that we cut accounts payable checks, but you know what? I kind of assumed that you could do that. That's what an accounting system is supposed to do. He said, but here's what I need. I need a report that shows me inventory turns by item category. Can your system do that? And I thought in my mind, I went to the Google search engine of Reports Digest. And I'm like, well, no, that report doesn't exist as he's talking about it in the system. But I can build it in Crystal Reports. There was this thing called Crystal Reports, great Canadian company founded that, and I'm like, okay, so I'm going to build this report for him on the fly, and I do it. I link the tables together, write out our joining, boom. I made it red, white, and blue because it was near Independence Day here in the States. I'm like, okay, great. So here's the report, and we get the deal. So it was a $60,000 deal, $30,000 in software, $30,000 in consulting, and I remember thinking, I'm a pretty smart guy. Like, how great is this for me that I was able to win this deal for us by my Crystal Reports prowess. About 6 months later, I'm out there probably trying to get the accounts payable check to print because there were always problems with alignments, all kind of crazy stuff like that. The guy throws his arm around me and says, Ed, you know that report that you gave me? I'm like, Evan, what are you talking about? He says, the report you gave me, the inventory report, because I had to give it to him. I did it during the demo. I couldn't even put it on the timesheet because it was done. Right.
Okay. Right.
And he's like, we've been able to figure out that because we have that information, we're going to be able to increase our revenue this year, our sales this year by 40%. They were roughly a $10 million company on a run rate now to do $14 million because on the strength of having this information in this report. And I thought something's wrong here. This guy is getting $4 million and I got nothing, zero. Well, at $60,000, I guess. And it just didn't make any sense to me. Well, it wasn't until I discovered the work of a guy by the name of Mahan Khalsa in his book called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play,
Right.
that I discovered my error. And what it was is I was being what Mahan calls a solutionist. I volunteered the solution too early in the process, and I didn't understand and didn't know what the value was to Evan and this company. And what I should have done instead was the following: is I should have and again, this is from Khalsa, he calls it moving off the solution. I should have said, thanks for asking. We do custom reports all the time. However, what we found is that when people are asking for some custom reports, there are other ways to get information out of the system. Would it be okay if I asked you a couple of questions as to why do you think you need this report? Now, I'm going to back up and break that down into three main segments. First was the part where I said, thanks for asking. We do stuff like this all the time. That's what I'll call the assuagement piece. Let the person know that, yes, they've come to the right place and that you do possibly have an answer for them. That middle piece is the pivot or the move where I say, but there's other ways of getting this information out, not always. And it's, this is a true statement. I'm not lying. I mean, custom report might be one way, but there might be other ways of getting this information. And then the third piece is really what's called the close. Now, it's not a close as in close the sale, but it's close as in it's a closed probe question. I'm asking a question that is designed to solicit a yes or no answer. So it begins with would, should, can, will, does. And I asked him, would it be okay if I asked you a couple of questions as to what's driving your need for this report? Now, 99 times out of 100, the person is going to say, sure, ask me some questions. And then what that allows me to do is move off the solution. So instead of me jumping in and showing, here's how you do this report, instead, what I'm now able to say is, well, let's talk about why you think you need this report. What's the evidence that you have that you need this report? And what's going to result from that conversation is the value. It's going to, what I'm going to get after digging down a little bit deeper is I'm going to get something in where now he might not have come up with the $4 million that it was going to make,
Right.
but I think he would have come up with $1 million. I mean, he knew that this was a big deal for him, which is why he told me stop. And if he had come up with, say, $1 million, and instead of the $60,000 I charged, I had charged, say, $100,000, a price that was more commiserate with the value, well, I think then he would have been happy. He probably still would have done the deal. And I would have been able to take that $40,000 and put it not only to my top line, but to my bottom line, because it didn't change my cost to serve at all.
Right.
And I think that what the notion here is that far too many professionals it's an expensive habit. They want to feel good about themselves and they want to demonstrate their expertise. But what they do is they jump in and they solve the problem or talk about the how they're going to solve the problem too early before they have an understanding as to what is the value to the customer and whether or not you're using even, if you're using bill by the hour, if you're doing hourly billing, if you're using subscription pricing, if you're using value pricing, it doesn't matter. You still need to have this conversation to understand what the prospective value is to the organization. And it's critical that we begin to have these conversations and move off that solution. And I think that's the thing that far too many professionals, we get stuck in this habit of providing our expertise early on under the guise of we have to demonstrate it in some way. And I think that's a big mistake. But it makes us feel good about ourselves. So it's an expensive habit to have.
Well, that's interesting how you said demonstrating expertise. And you're right. I think professionals think that the demonstration of expertise is providing an answer. And I've gone the opposite way. And I find that the best way to express your expertise is having the right questions. Because if you ask the correct questions, the other person knows that you express your expertise more from that part. I always found that it's not how you answer. It's not the answer. It's the question that matters more in my book. So
right. And part of the mantra here is to replace advice with curiosity. And this is a very Peter Drucker type concept that we replace your the advice that you're going to give with curiosity about the problem that the customer has.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important thing. And Kless says it this way. He says how you sell, right? This process of going through and asking these questions, how you sell is an indicator of how you will solve.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really important idea as well.
And it's funny because it's a subtle change. It's a critical change, but it's a subtle change. If you change your scope from, or your mindset from solving to asking the right question, you automatically get out of this solution mode and you end up being much better at understanding the subjective value from the customer's point.
Yes, absolutely. And look, this works the other way too, which I think is an important point, because so many people think that, either value pricing or subscription pricing, it's always about extracting the maximum from the customer. No, I don't think that that's the case at all. I think what it is it's setting a price that's commensurate with the value. And it's also about understanding that, hey, if this customer doesn't value this, if there's not really value to the customer, we perhaps don't want to do the work. We don't want to work for them. I don't know of any professional who wants to do work for someone who doesn't really need it.
Well, but when you're in solution mode, you kind of you automatically assume they need it. And that's I think that's the biggest fault with solution mode, because you're going to provide a solution whether they've asked for one or not, and you've assumed you've provided value, right? And that might not be the case. So that's another key component about, I call it turning off the solution brain, right? Turning it off, right?
Yep.
So that's really good. I like that concept. The biggest difference that I notice with the two models, both models focus on value. One is the value of the relationship, which I think is a subscription-based model. And the other is the value of what Ron has told me is stacking of services or outcomes, right? My question is, with regards to the value conversation, is there a difference because one is a portfolio based and one is an individual, one at a time? Could you go further on that?
I think it can be both, because and one of the things that Ron and I talk about with regard to subscription pricing is, yes, price the portfolio of customers that you're going after. But I do think that there is still something to be said, especially in smaller organizations where you have one or two professionals, where your portfolio of customers is going to be significantly limited. And that portfolio of customers, I think we may have to have a more specific conversation about value for each one. Now, if you want to go to market with a fixed price, put prices up on your website and say, this is our minimum price, and we have 3 packages, and here's what they are. I think that's great, and I think that that's absolutely a valid business model. But I do think that there is still a spot for bespoke value conversations that are still subscription price. They're still going to go to the customer with a subscription price, but we still want to uncover and understand what that value is to the customer before we proceed with the relationship. And I think that's important for us to note.
It's that time of year again, and after a great showing in 2021, the Successful Bookkeeper Summit returns even bigger and better. It's a 2-day virtual conference that features incredible speakers from the bookkeeping, accounting, and business worlds, such as value pricing expert Ron Baker and Joe Woodard of the Woodard Group. And that's just to name a few. The theme of this year's event is Make It Grow. And there's no doubt the content you'll consume will help you achieve more success than you ever thought possible. It all begins on November 9th, 2022. To secure your free spot, visit thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com/summit. And again, that's thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com/summit. Register today, and I'll see you at the summit. And now, let's get back to our interview.
Well, that's good. So basically, depending, I guess what you're saying is the smaller firms where they're probably having less than 200 or 300 customers, the one-on-one value conversation is still critical. Once you get to 1,000 or more, or 500, then does that change the value conversation?
I don't even know what the number is, right?
Right.
This gets to a notion of scalability, but
Right.
look, if you're a boutique organization that serves, let's just take one person servicing, I don't know, 15, 20 customers,
Right.
not 100, not even 150, not even 100, but 15
Yes.
to 20. I think that conversation, those 15 conversations have to be really important. I'm still going to price the portfolio. I'm going to price the risk pool across. I'm still going to go to market with an offering that offers some kind of has an insurance approach to it. But I do think that the value conversation in those is going, and we're going to tailor our pricing to the specific needs of that customer.
Right. So what you're saying is, let me see if I get it right. The value conversation will most likely be to some level on a one-to-one basis when we're talking about customer-based, not necessarily the volume of customers, but what happens is on a subscription-based model, they have a menu of different things they can pick for the same price. It's probably the difference between that and a value-based menu option is that they pick and choose, and you help them pick and choose in that subscription, compared to the value-based, which is more like, these are the things that you want. Does that?
I think that the value-based approach might be more along the lines of what Ram was talking about, the stacking of services, or talking about outputs and dealing with outputs.
Right.
And whereas the subscription model is more talking about a transformation or an outcome.
Right.
If Ron told the story of the landscaper, I don't want to repeat that, but I think if you listen to that episode, you want, what's the equivalent for an accounting or an accounting professional of providing the best curb appeal in the neighborhood,
Right.
What is that? And that's the outcome based, and it's really the transformation, the individual transformation, and a series of iterative transformations over and over again as people perhaps move in their stages of life or stages of business, that you're going to be there to be part of that ongoing set of transitions. We're as people, we like to think of ourselves, we're not pictures, we're movies. And we're constantly changing and constantly moving. And I think the subscription model does a better job at adjusting to that, because it is about saying, whatever I can do for you, if we can do it under our auspices, if we have the knowledge, we're going to do it for you. That's included in your subscription. We're not going to divvy that out and say, oh, well, it's not included. Well, now what might change from package to package is things like response time. How quickly are we going to get back to you? Mm-hmm. But what is included, I think, we want to make sure that we can be most inclusive as we possibly can. And then we do things like, and I'm sure Ron talked about this, plussing the offering. And I think some of those plussed offerings, as we introduce new services, those things can be put in at the higher levels, as long as the long-term outlook is that they filter down and ultimately will be offered to everyone at a certain point.
I see. So let's talk about plussing, because that's an interesting concept, because plussing in a traditional value-based is change order. That's how I see it. And plussing in a subscription model is improving that level of service, but not changing the price point. Does that make sense?
Correct. So I'll give you an example of a private engagement I was doing with an organization who had come to me, and they wanted to talk, and they were on a little mini subscription with me, and they mostly wanted to talk about pricing, right? Well,
right.
One conversation led down this path of, well, one of the things that we think we need to do is to create a system of grading and creating segments of our customers. They wanted to have a better understanding of how to do with who their A customers were, B, C, etc.
Right.
And of course, I have a presentation on that, and I'm not going to say to them, they were on a subscription with me. I'm not going to say, okay, well, if I increase the subscription price for you, I'll do this session on on segmenting your customers. I said, no, let's just do it. And the learning that I went through with that is, and look, I'm a project manager by formal education, right? I mean,
Right.
and the whole notion of change requests and change order is something that came very naturally to me. And what I learned in doing this engagement was, no. Scope matters less. Scope, in fact, maybe it doesn't even matter at all, as long as it's something that you have a competency in doing. Now, if I didn't have a competency in customer segmentation, I'm not going to offer it.
Correct. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
But since I did have material on that, I'm just going to freely offer it and include it as part of the conversation. Why would I not? And I think that's really the difference between the subscription model and even the value price model, with this notion of, hey, all right, in the past it was, well, let's go through the Department of Paperwork to process a change request.
Right. So that's the difference. Plussing automatically comes into a subscription-based model as part of so the services are kind of built in, is what can the firm do, right? And whatever the firm can do, I guess the way I see it is you have your base subscription, and then you have your all-inclusive. I know you could probably add another one, but I'm just putting those two down. So basically, the all-inclusive is whatever we do, or we do as an expert, that's included in your all-inclusive, period.
Yes, but I think ultimately it's to get all of those things down to and your segments on other things. So I know Ron talks a lot about the direct primary care model.
Right.
And there is tiering in that, but the way that Dr. Paul Thomas does it, in the physician who's really been one of the leaders in this, is he does it based on age. So his customer segments are based on the age of the patient, not based on the services they get. If you're 20 years old, and if you're 40 years old, you're still completely taken care of by Dr. Paul and Plum Health across the board. But
Right.
he has different price based on he's segmenting out by age. And I think that's something that we might want to look at in professional organizations, not segmenting by age, but some other segmentation that, maybe it is age of the business. I'm partially serious about that. If you're helping a customer who's a startup versus someone who's in the middle of, just growing their business, or someone who's in maintain mode, or
Actually,
or someone who is trying to sell their business.
Actually, that's really good. That's actually a beautiful subscription model in my approach, is startup, existing, and then the last one would be transition, like selling or next generation modeling. I think that's actually not a bad one you just created. I thought that's pretty good. That's pretty good, right on the fly. Here's a subscription based model that you can utilize.
There you go.
And I think that's really relationship based, right? Because we just provided a sample of how you can do it by aging of the corporation, and the services that we do is similar to all three, but but each one will need a different subset of our services, or a different expertise level, right?
Yeah, or a different level of engagement, right?
Yeah.
A different level of engagement. That's all.
Yeah, but that's a great example, to be quite honest. I think for us accountants and bookkeepers, that's a great example, because we all know that a corporation has those three basic components, right? When you look at an age of a corporation, it's startup, it's during its productive years, and we're talking about the owners at the end of the day, because that's who we relate to, that's who we're dealing with, and the majority of them are entrepreneurs. It's not that we have large corporations that are publicly funded, and so for the most part, we're talking about small to mid-sized businesses, which are owner-based.
Sure.
Right? So that would be a great model. So way to go, Ed. You just brought in a new model for
I'm trying, Louie. That's my good idea. I met my quota.
Yeah, you did great. I mean, I don't know if you planned it or not, but that was a great example. I'm quite happy, because that kind of puts relationship rather than stacking of service. I don't know how better you can describe it, because stacking of services would be services, and relationship would be based on what area or what level of maturity the company is in.
Sure,
So
and
really
and,
cool.
let me give you another one that I have thought a little bit about, and this is from the work of Peter Block. One question that I strongly suggest, and I talked about this at Scaling New Heights on my main stage, is to ask the following question: which of the following three best describes the type of relationship you want with a provider? So this is now the professional asking this question of a prospect. So which of these three best describes the nature of the relationship that you're looking for? Are you looking for an extra pair of hands? Are you looking for an expert? Or are you looking for a collaborative partner? And if we understand what best describes what they want, we could create pricing around that too. If you want us to be a pair of hands, that's this relationship. If you want us to be an expert, it's this relationship. If you want us to be a collaborative partner with you, that's this type of relationship. And have them decide what is best for them.
And that's where the value conversation comes in, because you have to have a conversation perspective to understand which one, or it could be even a combination of all three. So that makes perfect sense. I actually love those three questions. Those are really good questions to put into a perspective. And also too, when you're building your pricing for each subscription, that would be a good way to understand how you would price each relationship, right?
Yep.
That's really good. So Ed, this is great. The value conversation, if I understand you correctly, that doesn't change. Maybe the questions might change, maybe the direction, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a value conversation both at the subscription level and at the individual level when you're interviewing people to pick a spot. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think it's just good consulting. I mean, forget about whether the sales side of it. It's just good consulting to be able to understand the perspective of the customer and what their perceived value is.
So here's my next question, and this one is more about how do you perceive the professions adopting this? Because we've both you and I and Ron and all the other value pricing leaders had a bit of an uptake in trying to get this value pricing model accepted. What do you think the profession is going to treat this model? Like, what do you think the results are going to be from here?
Early indications are that this model seems to be a little bit more acceptable to the professions. And I'm not sure why that is. Because it could be a couple things. It could be the audience has changed. 20 years ago, we were trying to sell this idea to a generation ago, and now there's a new generation of people, and maybe they're just more accepting of the idea, and it's not or accepting of new ideas, and it's not the idea itself. It's just that it's just who the audience is.
I see.
But I also think, and again, I apologize if Ron talked about this. I think this is an important point to understand, that there is a difference between recurring revenue and reoccurring revenue. Let's define that. Recurring revenue is the full subscription piece, right? This is it's constant. Reoccurring revenue is what has been traditionally thought of as, we do our engagement letter once a year and we're going to do your tax return, and we do that once a year. That's reoccurring revenue. And that's different from recurring revenue, which is the true subscription. You paid on some kind of monthly or quarterly basis. It's usually a shorter term, and really puts, again, the relationship at the center, whereas the reoccurring stuff is about that service piece. And I think that's an important distinction to make too.
Yes. The way I put it is matching. There is no matching in a subscription-based model.
Correct.
You can't match what you did based on the price point. That they're completely independent. When you're with regards to the other model where it's engagement based, it's matching the service that you're doing, even though it's year after year, it's still matching a specific service to a price point.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying? That's a big difference, right? And
Yep.
I think that's why subscription-based modeling, when people do business valuations, value it at a much higher rate because of the fact that it's not designed based on activity. It's more based on the relationship. And
Right. If it's truly recurring revenue, not
right,
reoccurring revenue. And I
right.
realize that those two phrases are really, really close, but I think
Yes,
there's an important difference.
right, right. And I think that's probably going to be the biggest hurdle with any or any experts out there, because if they think let's see if I get this right, reoccurring, is that's the old one, right? Reoccurring.
Yep.
Is they might think of that as recurring revenue based on subscription, and when they make that analogy, that's where they're making a mistake.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Right. And if you're an investor on subscription based modeling, you would discount reoccurring revenue.
Yes.
Makes
you
sense.
would.
Okay.
Yep.
So here's my last question on this, and I did ask this to Ron. And it's about valuation, and this is the interesting thing. So traditional accounting firms or bookkeeping firms is usually a multiple of 1 or 1 point something to revenue to determine value. You don't see in my understanding, to get a 2.0 to revenue for a accounting or bookkeeping firm, that's outrageously high. Usually it's in the 1.2, 1.3, 1.5. I've seen them up to 1.8 right now. But that's based on what we call the old systems. If an accounting or bookkeeping firm really establishes what we call subscription-based modeling, is that going to change their valuation period?
I think so. And for further conversation about this, I suggest that you listen to the show that Ron and I did on the Soul of Enterprise with John Warillo, who's the author of The Automatic Customer.
I love his book. I've read it. I've got it on audio as well. He's amazing. I love that book.
Yep.
I would recommend that book to anybody that's listening to this. He's got like 10 different models of subscription, I think, or something like that. I forgot what it is, but and I agree with you. The Automatic Customer is a really good book.
Yes. And he really, I think, has expanded his thinking on that. And that's why I suggest listening to the interview too. Right. Has expanded his thinking around that with regard to the multiple. And he's seeing businesses getting 5 and 6 multiples. So
yeah, my internal gut was between 5 to 10 if you actually develop the proper. Now, when I say develop, I don't think that, because when we talk about value-based pricing, and then I go into CPA firms, because we have a value-based price, but really all it is they take when you investigate it, you find out that it was time inputs, right? Annualized divided by 12, right? That's not a real value-based model,
no,
right? So when we talk about multiples of 5 to 10, you must understand that you would have to convert your professional practice into a real subscription-based, relationship-based model to get those ratios. It's not, again, recurring compared to reoccurring is a huge difference, right?
Right. Yep.
That's cool. Well, Ed, this was fascinating. And by the way, the stuff that you talked about is just added value to what we talked about, Ron, in the first episode on this subscription-based model. So the two of you are great. I always enjoy talking to the two of you. Now, before you go, what I'd like you to do is talk to us a little bit about the Soul of Enterprise, because you have mentioned it quite a bit. It's one of my favorite podcasts. Tell me a little bit about that and what that's all about.
Sure. Well, Ron and I started the Soul of Enterprise about 8 years ago. Actually, I know a little over 8. We just completed our 400th episode, and we do approximately 50 a year. So the math was easy there. And
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And we dedicated the show to the idea that business has a spiritual, although not necessarily religious, component to it, and that it's important for us to understand that. We feel that business is a noble calling and should be viewed as such. We love to talk and champion the entrepreneur in it, and that's what the show is about. We've moved from from doing a lot of topical conversations early on in our history to more and more interviews that we've done with folks like John Murillo and Teen So, who is one of the big prophets or evangelists, probably the better word of the subscription model. And it's just a lot of times Ron and I just thinking out loud. So the soulofenterprise.com, you can see show notes, previews to upcoming shows there as well, and listen to all 400 episodes if you so desire. And then you can obviously subscribe in your podcast player of choice.
So, Ed, tell the audience where they can get a hold of you, and if they want to talk to you or if they want to connect, let us know what's the best ways for us to reach you.
Email address is ed.kless@sage.com. That's the easiest way to contact me, ed.kless, Kless as in Sam. It's bless with a K, at sage.com.
Perfect. Well, as always, I've enjoyed talking to you. Any last words on what you think what's going to happen in the industry related to subscription modeling? Do you think it's going to go faster than value pricing?
I think it is going to diffuse faster than value pricing did. Yes, but as the great '80s band Timbuk 3 said, "It's a future so bright we got to wear shades."
I don't even know who that band is, but I do like the statement. So that's cool, Ed. Anyway, Ed, thank you so much for joining us here at the Successful Bookkeeper Podcast Spotlight Edition. And I look forward to connecting with you again in the near future.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me, Louie.
You've been listening to the Spotlight edition of The Successful Bookkeeper with Louie Prosperi. For more information and to access the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening and have a great week.